Good evening. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That was Hazoirim by Shlomo Katz. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we gather to do some learning on the middle day of the week. This Wednesday, we're on our way towards Shabbos. Sharon in New Jersey, Nancy, North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, James in Indianapolis, Bella in Florida, John in Maine, Patrice in Utah, Hannah in New York, Renee in Indiana, Karen in Northern California, Paul in the Great Northwest, Paul in Chicago, Guy in Ohio, Gloria in Hemet, California, Bill in mid-Missouri, Josette in Colorado, in the Rocky Colorado Mountains. Is it snowing there? I see the snowflakes. Lucy in Minnesota, Jan in Southern California. Welcome, everybody. What's going on? Bill, wonderful news. My thesis passed today with only minimal formatting revisions. Didn't you just hand it in? It's like book length, right? Your professor's awesome. He read it already and gave you that feedback. And mazel tov, Bill. What an amazing accomplishment. I know you worked on that hard and long. Over here on the YouTube side, nobody checking in yet. Welcome, welcome everybody. Today's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by my good friend Lavi Klein, in honor of Reb Sal. So thank you, Lavi. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Big daf today. We're opening a new chapter, chapter 3, here in Tractate Moed Katan, the 12th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of hamoed, the intermediate days of Passover and Sukkot. We open chapter 3 at the bottom of the B side of page 13, and we'll be doing page Yudalet today, page 14 today. But at the bottom of 13b with Mishna number 1 of chapter 3, and these may shave and cut their hair on hamoed, the intermediate days of a festival. It's interesting that this chapter, it's a new chapter, and it opens with the word and, right? The conjunction seemingly connecting it to the previous Mishnas. What's the deal? Because in the first two chapters, we were talking about work is normally not permitted on the intermediate days of the festival, but the exception is to avoid a financial loss as long as it's not excessive exertion. The exception is to provide for the needs of the community, or an exception is for the sake of rejoicing in the festival. So likewise, normally shaving, laundering clothes, hair cutting, not permitted on the intermediate days of the festival, but here are some exceptions, and that's what links this Mishnah to what has come before. So these may shave and cut their hair, whereas the normal policy is, the law is you can't. But who can? One who comes from a country overseas, and one who is released from a house of captivity, and one who comes out of prison on the intermediate days of a festival, and one who had been ostracized and therefore prohibited from cutting his hair. So these are all people who didn't have the opportunity to cut their hair, shave, launder their clothes on the eve of the festival. So they can't do it during the festival. That's certainly going to be prohibited, but now they are allowed on the intermediate days. This will enable them to rejoice better in the festival when they're feeling, clean cut, as it were. So one who came out of prison, one who had been ostracized and therefore prohibited from cutting his hair. Who is ostracized? In the ancient world, this is somebody who did not submit to a ruling of the sages. So the sages ostracized him. This is not as significant an excommunication as a herem, when somebody is completely banned from having contact with the community, as the Jewish philosopher Spinoza was banned from the Sephardic Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam. Right, the Portuguese Jewish community had moved to Amsterdam, and in the 1600s, Spinoza, for his heretical beliefs, was banned, meaning no Jew could even talk to him. Herem is a little bit different. Rabbi Eliezer was the subject of being ostracized because he wouldn't submit to the sages in the episode of the oven of Achnai, which we'll come to, famous story in the tractate Bava Metzia in a couple years. And we've alluded to that story before. But even though, he was sort of separated from the community and he could no longer teach, the sages could visit him, and talk to him. His student Rabbi Akiva came and saw him. So this excommunication, this ostracism, very serious, but not as serious as a herem. At any rate, when you are ostracized from the community, that should sadden you very much, and so you have the practices of mourning during that time. So you couldn't cut your hair, but if your ostracism ends in these intermediate days of the festival, then you can cut your hair. You're one of the people for whom this exception applies. Who else? And similarly, one who had vowed not to cut his hair, and then he requested of a sage to dissolve his vow. Right? You're bound by your vows, but you can go to a qualified sage and say, "Can you dissolve my vow for me?" He will ask you if you had known what the consequences of making this vow would mean in your life. Would you have made the vow? No, I would not. And then he could release you from the vow. But you can't release yourself from it. And requested of a sage to dissolve his vow. And he was released on the intermediate days of the festival. Also, the Nazir, whose term of Nazirus ended on the intermediate days of the festival. This is someone who made a vow to be a Nazir, so you're going to abstain from all products of the grape and not cut your hair, who was the most famous Nazir, Samson, of the Samson and Delilah story. And the leper. The leper is not the leper, the way we understood leprosy, but the Metzora, the one suffering from Tzara'as, physical manifestation of a spiritual malady. So the Metzora, who needs to purify himself on the intermediate days of the festival. Why? His term ended, right? He was healed from his Tzara'as. Now he goes through that 7-day purification process, part of which is to shave all the off of his body. So they're going to permit him to cut his hair and shave on chol hamoed, in order to regain his tahara, his state of ritual purity. And these may launder their clothes on the intermediate days of the festival, on chol hamoed. One who comes from a country overseas, and one who is released from a house of captivity, and one who comes out of prison on chol hamoed. They wear their clothes before the festival, so they can do it now. And one who had been ostracized, and the sages released him from that decree of ostracism. And similarly, one who had vowed not to launder his clothes, and he requested of his sage to be released from that vow on chol hamoed. He can now wash his clothes. Hand towels and barber's towels, which are used to cover a person having a haircut, and body drying towels, all of which get quickly soiled, may be laundered on the intermediate days of a festival. Zavim, these are men who are plural of being a zav. A zav is a man who is suffering from an impure venereal emission. and zavot, who are women who are having kind of menstrual bleeding, but not at the normal time of their cycle, and they have it for 3 consecutive days. So she becomes a zava, plural zavot. And also menstruating women and women who have just given birth, and all others who leave a state of tuma, of ritual impurity, and now are going to enter a state of tahara, ritual purity, and part of their process of leaving that state of tuma is immersing. Right? Immersing. So they're going to need to immerse and dry themselves, and they can also launder their clothes. These people are all permitted to launder their clothes in order to purify themselves. But all other people, not in these conditions, are prohibited from laundering their clothes on the intermediate days of a festival. Why are they prohibited from laundering their clothes? We understand that you shouldn't be doing your profession, right? You shouldn't be doing your normal work-a-day, weekday work, because it's going to get in the way of rejoicing in the festival. But, you can cook. Even on festival days, you can cook. You can certainly cook and wash dishes and, sort of all this stuff that goes into food preparation, certainly permitted, even on the festival day itself, and certainly on the intermediate days. So, you want to be dressed up and rejoicing in the festival. Why wouldn't they let you launder your clothes? It's not such excessive work. I mean, it's much harder work in the ancient world than it is today. But why is it that they wouldn't let you launder your clothes on chol hamoed? It's a very interesting reason, and we're going to be coming to it in a few minutes. That was the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that all other people are prohibited from performing these actions during chol hamoed? Why are these actions, shaving, hair cutting, and laundering, included in the category of actions that are permitted? Why are these actions not included in the category of actions that are permitted in deference to the festival? These should help you rejoice in the festival. Shaving, getting a haircut, laundering your clothes. Why are they prohibited unless you fall into these exceptional categories? And the Gemara answers, as we learned in a Mishnah, we did this in Tractate Tainus, both the members of the priestly watch, whose week it is to serve in the temple, and the members of the non-priestly watch, meaning who represent the nation of Israel, kind of very respected, upright people, who are going to be the witnesses when communal offerings are brought every day by the priests of that week's priestly watch. So both the members of the priestly watch and the non-priestly watch, who accompanied the members of the watch to Jerusalem, are prohibited from cutting their hair or laundering their clothes during that week that they're serving, right? The priests would serve, they were separated into 24 watches, and each watch would serve for a week at a time. And during that week, they and the members, the representatives of Israel who accompanied them, the members of the non-priestly watch, they were prohibited to cut their hair or launder their clothes during their week of service. However, on the Thursday of that week, they are permitted to launder and shave and cut their hair in deference to Shabbos. Why is this relevant? And Rabba bar Chana said, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, what is the reason that the members of the priestly and non-priestly watch are prohibited from cutting their hair and laundering their clothes? It is in order that they not enter their watch when they are untidy. If it were permitted for them to cut their hair and launder their clothes during the week of their watch, they would leave their haircuts and laundry until the middle of that week and begin their service in a disorderly state. Here too, ordinary people are prohibited from cutting their hair or laundering their clothes on the intermediate days of a festival in order that they complete all their necessary preparations beforehand and not enter the festival when they are untidy. This is an absolute policy consideration to influence behavior among the nation of Israel. Right? It's not an inherent halachic reason to prevent shaving, haircutting, and laundering. It's the nature of, it's human nature, all of us, right? And this happens every Friday when there's that scramble to get ready for Shabbos. And there's all kinds of these last minute things that we're doing, or we're trying to just, get done with our work because we're going to enter Shabbos. All the more so during the last day before we enter a week-long holiday, right? When we're not going to be working at our professions. So you can imagine there's those last-minute business deals, last-minute details that we're attending to, and something that could easily get forgotten, swept under the rug, ignored, is your own bodily preparation for the festival. That you should be tidy. You should shave. I definitely need to shave. You should have your hair cut. You should have clean clothes for the festival. And if they let you do it, chol hamoed, a lot of people would just say, all right, I didn't make it in time for the opening days of the festival. I was a little untidy. Okay, I'll make up for it as soon as we get into the second day in Israel or the third day outside of Israel. When we get into chol hamoed, then shave, haircut, wash, etc. And then I'm good for the rest of the festival when I'm not working anyway and I have a lot more time available. The sages didn't want us doing that, so they said you can't do these hygienic type things during the festival. You have to do it before. That's an important lesson, especially like those of us who, weren't born religious and observant and became more observant over the years. This is a sort of thing that you could forget. And like lock this into your memory now, that it's definitely part of Shabbos and it's definitely part of festivals to be clean, shaved, haircut nice, have nice clothes ready, and you do that in advance so that you can slide into Shabbos or slide into the festival physically ready, mentally ready, spiritually ready. Rabbi Zera asks, if one lost an item on the eve of a festival and he was busy searching for it, and he had no time to cut his hair or launder his clothes before the festival commenced, can one say that since he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control, which prevented him from taking care of these matters prior to the festival, that he is permitted to cut his hair and launder his clothes on the intermediate days of the festival? Is he like one who was released from prison or who arrived from an overseas trip and who was prevented from taking care of this stuff before the holiday? He's not in those groups, right? What it is he lost something right before the festival started, and I'm sure you can all identify. I know I can. You lose something, you're going insane. You know where you put it. Nina and I have the principle that almost always when you lose something, it's in the place that you first thought to look, but you didn't look carefully enough in that place. Then you go waste all kinds of time and energy looking everywhere else, and you finally come back to that place. There is a prayer. In fact, there are two prayers that I'm aware of when you lose something. The one that we've been using, I heard from Moshe Storch. I actually just sent him a message before we started, which I don't think he's had a chance to answer me, asking him where he got that. But the one I heard from Moshe is something like this. Let's say you're looking for your wallet, right? So you would say, Master of the universe, just as I and my wallet are both revealed before you, may it be your will that the location of my wallet be revealed before me. And very often that works. Great prayer. But that is not the official prayer for locating lost objects. There is a more well-known, famous, and established prayer for finding lost objects. Okay, so I have it here. It's on the Chabad website. You can just Google Chabad prayer for lost objects. And so this is a little article from Menachem Posner, and he says, there is indeed a traditional prayer and procedure to be followed when seeking God's assistance in retrieving a lost object. And the following is recited. Rabbi Binyamin said, all are presumed blind until the Holy One, blessed be He, illuminates their eyes. And we know this from the verse, God opened her eyes and she went and filled up the water skin. That's Genesis 21:19. It must be referring to Hagar, right? When Sarah insisted that Abraham put Hagar and Ishmael out of his house, and she thought that they would die of thirst in the wilderness, and then she saw that there was a fountain right there. So you say 3 times, God of Meir. This is Rabbi Meir from the Tana of the Mishna that we often encounter. God of Meir, answer me. God of Meir, answer me. God of Meir, answer me. In the merit of the charity which I am donating for the sake of the soul of Rabbi Meir, the miracle worker, may I find such and such which I have lost. That's the official prayer, traditional prayer for finding a lost object. And then you got to donate to charity, which is always a good thing to do. And in the merit of that, may God, illuminate your eyes and assist you in finding the thing that you lost. And that can be quite soothing and quite effective when we're going nuts and looking for something. Okay. That is not on this page. What's on this page is this idea that somebody lost an object on the eve of the festival, was so busy looking for it, didn't have a chance to cut hair, launder clothes, shave. So may he do so on chol hamoed. So is he since he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control, which prevented him from taking care of these matters prior to the festival, is he permitted to cut his hair and launder his clothes on chol hamoed? Or perhaps it is not clearly evident to others that his reason for not attending to those needs was because he lost something that was beyond his control. But other people don't know that when they see him laundering his clothes or cutting his hair. They know he wasn't traveling. They know he wasn't released from jail. They know that he wasn't released from captivity. So, maybe he just doesn't realize, or he's just flouting the law against laundering and cutting hair. And maybe that's a reason to not permit him to do so. Abaye said in answer to this question that there is a principle of the sages that applies here. They prohibited the baking of decorated Syrian cakes for Passover, lest people tarry in their preparation of these elaborate cakes and the cakes become leavened. They become chametz and they would be prohibited during Passover. Now, when Baitos ben Zunin wished to prepare the cakes in a way that would not lead to a violation of any prohibition, the sages nevertheless prohibited it. They explain that were they to permit him to do so, others would say, well, all the decorated Syrian cakes are forbidden, but the decorated Syrian cakes of Baitos are permitted? Why is he this exceptional case? And this teaches that the sages do not permit exceptions when the reason for leniency is not clearly evident to others who may be observing the person. Like in the case of one who was busy looking for a lost item. They didn't see that he was busy on the eve of the festival, and if they saw him laundering, shaving, etc., chol hamoed, they might think that he's flouting those laws. Rabbi Zera retorted to this argument of Abaye, and according to your reasoning, that which Rabbi Asi said that Rabbi Yochanan said, anyone who has only one shirt is permitted to launder it on chol hamoed. There too, one could apply the principle that others will say, well, all the decorated Syrian cakes are prohibited except those of Baitos. Why is this person permitted? They don't know that he only owns one shirt, and that's the reason why he's laundering it. That's not immediately evident to somebody who's observing this. The Gemara rejects this argument. Wasn't it already said about this case that Mar, the son of Rav Ashi, said his belt is proof for him, as when he launders his only shirt, what's he wearing? He's not going to be around in public bareback. So what he's done is he's got a coat, he's got an outer garment, he's wearing his outer garment and it's belted together, where normally that would just be an outer garment and not belted in that way. And, from the circumstances, and they see him laundering a shirt and wearing a coat rather than a different shirt, they would understand he only owns one shirt, and that's why he's laundering it. Rav Ashi taught a different version of this passage as follows. Rabbi Zera asks, with regard to a craftsman who lost an item on the eve of a festival, and he was busy searching for it, what is the law? Is it permitted for him to launder his clothes and cut his hair on chol hamoed because he had been unable to do so before the festival? And the Gemara explains the two sides of the question. Can one say that since he is a craftsman, it is clearly evident why he did not launder his clothes and cut his hair before the festival, as many people would have come to his place of work and they would have seen that he was busy looking for his lost article? Or Perhaps, since the special circumstances are not as clearly evident as in those cases in the Mishnah, someone who just got out of jail, just returned from a trip, it is not permitted for him to cut his hair or launder his clothes on chol hamoed. And the dilemma shall stand. Teku, they didn't get an answer for the guy who lost an object, and that's why he didn't launder or shave. New subject. The Mishnah taught, one who comes from a country overseas on chol hamoed is permitted to cut his hair. The Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, as it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says, one who comes from a country overseas on chol hamoed must not shave or cut his hair due to the fact that he left his home without permission. Why is he traveling on chol hamoed? That means that he was on the road during the festival. Not good. And the Gemara continues to explain the definition and parameters of leaving without permission. Rava said, if one left the land of Israel, one who lives in the Holy Land, and he left to travel, just to go sightseeing, all agree that it is prohibited for him to shave during chol hamoed because he left on his own initiative, and this is not considered an unavoidable circumstance. One who leaves in Israel shouldn't leave Israel just for fun. If he left for basic sustenance, he left because, to feed himself, he needed to do this, i.e. due to financial difficulty, so all agree that it is permitted for him to shave upon his return because he is regarded as having left due to circumstances beyond his control. They disagree only with regard to the case where he left to earn greater profit. He didn't leave just to go sightseeing. He didn't leave because it was absolutely needed to in order to eat, but he did leave for a business reason. So he had enough to live on in the land of Israel, but he left in order to increase his income. One sage, Rabbi Yehuda, compares him to one who left for travel, for sightseeing, and the other sage, the rabbis of the Mishnah, compare him to one who left for basic sustenance. The Gemara raises an objection to this analysis from a baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, the statement of Rabbi Yehuda seems more reasonable in a case when he left without permission. And the statement of the rabbi seems more reasonable when one left with permission. So the Gemara now has to clarify what is meant by without permission. If we say that it means he left to travel, well, didn't you say that in this case all agree that it is prohibited for him to cut his hair upon his return? Rather say that it means he left for basic sustenance. But didn't you say that all agree it is permitted for him to cut his hair when he left for this financial difficulty? So rather it is obvious that it means he left in search of greater profit, and this is where Rabbi Yehuda and the sages disagree. Say that the latter clause of the baraisa is as follows. The statement of the rabbis, according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the statement of the rabbis seems more reasonable in a case when one left with permission. The Gemara clarifies what is meant by with permission. If we say that he left for basic sustenance, didn't you say that all agree that it is permitted for him to cut his hair? Rather say that it means that he left for greater profit. But didn't you say in the first clause that the statement of Rabbi Yehuda seems more reasonable in this case? Therefore, according to Rava's distinctions, there is an internal contradiction within the baraisa, meaning that there's three cases. For sure, he shouldn't have gone, and he's prohibited. For sure, he's allowed to go, financial difficulty, so he can shave and launder. And that middle case where he left for greater income, it's a little unclear. Do they both agree that he's permitted? Do they both agree that he's prohibited? Does Rav Yehuda say he's prohibited and the sages say he's permitted? That seems to be where we are. But the Gemara resolves this difficulty. This is what Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is saying. The statement of Rabbi Yehuda seems more reasonable to the rabbis in the case where one left without permission. And what is meant without permission? It means a case where one left to travel, as even the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda, only when one left for greater profit. But when one left to travel, they agree with Rabbi Yehuda that it is prohibited for one to shave and cut his hair. And the statement of the rabbi seems more convincing to Rabbi Yehuda in the case of where one left with permission. And what is meant by with permission? It is a case where one left for basic sustenance, as even Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the rabbis, only where one left for greater profit. But when he left for basic sustenance, Rabbi Yehuda concedes to them that it is permitted to shave and cut his hair. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's intent was not to decide between the opinions of the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda, but simply to clarify their dispute. Shmuel said, if a baby was born on a festival and he has long hair that is bothering him, it is permitted to cut his hair on the intermediate days of the festival, as there is no greater prison than this. What? So if the baby's hair is bothering him, can we cut his hair? He was born on the festival, so obviously no opportunity to cut the hair before the festival. And this is like somebody who got out of prison, right? Because being trapped inside the body of another person, there's no greater prison than that. Once the baby is like one who got out of prison, and certainly we could cut his hair on chol hamoed. A precise reading of Shmuel's statement indicates that if the child was born on the festival, yes, his hair may be cut. However, if he was born before the festival, but for some reason his hair was not cut then, no, it is not permitted to cut it on the intermediate days of the festival because there was time to do so before the festival. And Rav Pinchas raised an objection from that which is taught in a Baraisa. All of those about whom the sages said it is permitted to shave and cut hair on chol hamoed, they are also permitted to shave and cut hair during the days of mourning, right? That when they're in mourning for the death of a close relative. But from this it follows that one who is prohibited from shaving and cutting his hair on chol hamoed is also prohibited from shaving and cutting his hair during the days of mourning. And if you say that with regard to a baby, there is a distinction between being born before the festival and being born on it, and in some cases it is prohibited to cut the hair of the baby, then you find that mourning is practiced even with a minor. Isn't it taught in a Baraisa? One rends the clothes, right? When a Jew dies, his close relatives rip their clothes. Do you rip the clothes of a minor? Minors are not obligated in these types of laws. But do you rip their clothes anyway? Yes. Why? One rends the clothes of a minor whose relative has passed away due to the desire to bring about feelings of grief among those who see him. However, there's no inherent requirement for the minor to observe any of the laws of mourning. Since we're tying, right, the chol hamoed to mourning, we keep doing that because they're similar laws. They're not the same, but they're similar. So they're saying, why shouldn't we just be allowed to cut the baby's hair even if it was born before the festival and they didn't, cut the hair then? Are we going to say that when a child has a parent die tragically, that they're not obligated in the laws of mourning, but we rip their clothes? So we're applying the laws of mourning to the child. Are we also going to say that, well, they shouldn't? You don't get a haircut during mourning, so likewise a child wouldn't get a haircut. Now, a Maimar, Rav Ashi said it is taught explicitly in the first Baraisa cited by Rav Pinchas that if it is prohibited for one to have a haircut during the festival, it is likewise prohibited to have a haircut during the week of mourning. Now that was merely an inference. Perhaps there are those among them, i.e. those listed in the Mishnah, for whom it is prohibited, while there are others among them for whom it is permitted, and the laws of mourning do not apply to a baby. And a Maimar, and some say it was Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi, taught, and we're on the B side of 14, by the way, taught that statement in this manner. Shmuel said, with regard to a baby, it is permitted to cut his hair during the festival. It is no different whether he was born whether he was born during the festival, and it is no different whether he was born beforehand. And in fact, that is the law, right? So if the baby's hair is bothering him, you can cut that on chol hamoed, right? It doesn't matter that you had the opportunity before the festival. Maybe it wasn't bothering him before the festival, so you didn't think to cut his hair. But on chol hamoed, you can cut a baby's hair if it is bothering the baby. And by the way, you might be asking, isn't there a thing that Jewish boys, you don't cut their hair until they're 3 years old, and then you have an ushperin, right? It's just a nice, beautiful ceremony, which is at the same time that they finally get a haircut. So very often, from very Orthodox, observant Jewish families, their boys who are under 3 years old have very long hair. Sometimes they look a little girly because of that. But then they have that ceremony, they cut their hair, it's a very beautiful ceremony, and they start to learn Torah at the same time. But that custom, that tradition to not have the haircut until they're 3 and then to have the ushperin, that's modern. That actually only became widespread in the observant Jewish community in the 17th century. right? So it's a little bit tied to Hasidic practices. There's a lot more that you can learn about the Ushparin, but that custom didn't exist in Talmudic times. We said that. And so Rav Pinchas said, we too learn in the Baraisa a support for this statement, that you can cut the baby's hair, whether he was born before the festival or on it. All of those whom the sages said it is permitted to shave and cut his hair on chol hamoed, it is also permitted to shave and cut his hair during his mourning, meaning you arrived from overseas, you got out of prison, you got out of captivity, etc. You're in one of those. Your term of Nazir ascended. You had a vow rescinded. And so you would be able to cut your hair at that time. Normally, you can't cut your hair or shave during the Shiva week, but if you're in one of those situations, you would be allowed. If you say that with regard to a baby, it is prohibited to cut his hair, well, then you find that mourning is practiced even with a minor. And it was taught in a Baraisa, one rends the clothes of a minor whose relative has passed away due to the desire to bring about feelings of grief among those who see him. However, there is no inherent requirement for the minor to observe any of the halachas of mourning. And so if you said that you can't cut the baby's hair on the intermediate days of mourning, and we have this link between the laws of chol hamoed and the laws of mourning, you might think that you can't that you are going to impose the laws of mourning on a minor, but we don't. And Rav Ashi said it is taught explicitly in the first Baraisa cited by Rav Pinchas that if it is prohibited for one to shave during the festival, it is likewise prohibited to shave during the week of mourning. Is that true? That was merely an inference. Perhaps that link is not so direct. Perhaps there are those among them there are some for whom it is prohibited to shave or launder or cut hair during mourning, and it's not the same group who has that permission on chol hamoed, right? The laws are not the same. If so, there's no clear support for the Baraisa from Shmuel's statement. A mourner does not practice the laws of his mourning on a festival, as it is stated, and you shall rejoice in your festival. So wait a minute, these laws seem to be linked, but now there's a real wrinkle in that link, right? And we see this, that somebody lost a close relative, shortly before a festival, and so they start to Shiva, and let's say on the second or third day of Shiva, Passover arrives, or Sukkot arrives. What happens? Are the laws of their mourning overridden by the mitzvah, the commandment to rejoice in the festival? And the Gemara explains, if it is a mourning period that had already begun at the outset of the festival, the positive mitzvah of rejoicing on the festival, which is incumbent upon the community, comes and overrides the positive mitzvah of the individual to be in mourning. And if the mourning period began only now, i.e. the deceased died during the festival, the positive mitzvah of the individual does not come and override the positive mitzvah of the community. All are commanded to rejoice in the festival. Somebody who lost a relative, he's commanded to enter a state of mourning and not have certain practices. But the commandment to rejoice in the festival overrides the commandment of mourning. There's a lot of nuances to these laws. If you're ever in that situation, you must consult with your rabbi. The Gemara asks, with regard to one who was ostracized, what is the law? Must he observe the practices of ostracism, or are they overridden by the mitzvah to rejoice on the festival? Rav Yosef said, come and hear and answer from that which is taught. Now we start to explain a case which is going to lead to the conclusion that the requirements of, the things that you have to do when you've been ostracized, like not shave or cut your hair, are not going to be overridden by the needs of the festival to rejoice in the festival. How does this work? So Rav Yosef said, come in here and answer from that which is taught. During the festival, the court judges cases of capital law, meaning a death penalty case, cases of lashes, where the penalty would be flogging, and cases of monetary law. Now, you would think that court would be closed during the festival. But it's not. The judges will sit and judge these cases. It is known that if one does not listen to and follow the judgment, among the possibilities of enforcement is that we ostracize him until he accepts the verdict. And if it enters your mind that one does not observe the practices of ostracism during the festival, then the following kal v'chomer argument can be made. If, for one who has already been ostracized at the outset of the festival comes and overrides his observance of that status, is it reasonable that now we, the court, should ostracize he who does not listen to the judgment of the court during the festival itself? Rather, it must be that one does observe the practices of ostracism even during the festival. Right? So you could say that the court will not sit and hear cases during the festival, but they don't do that because it's a perversion of justice to delay justice. So certain cases have to be heard. As we'll see, there's a question of, but aren't the judges then prevented from rejoicing in the festival? We'll come back to that. But the idea is, if they're going to sit and hear cases, and ostracism gets overridden by the mitzvah to rejoice in the festival, and ostracism is an important enforcement tool for the court, then how can they sit and hear cases and not have that method of enforcing their verdict? It must be that if they're going to hear cases, then ostracism still holds during the festival and doesn't get overridden. And in the case of the ostracized one, by the commandment to rejoice in the festival. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, there is no proof from here, as perhaps when the Baraisa states that the court judges cases, what is meant is that it deliberates in judgment on the festival. They hear the case, they debate the case among themselves, but they don't issue a verdict until after the festival, at which time ostracism would remain one of the enforcement tools available to them. So says Abaye, well, maybe what it means that they hear cases, they only hear it and deliberate, but they don't issue the verdict. Therefore, the court never ostracizes someone during the festival, and accordingly, there is no kal v'chomer argument proving that one observes the practices of ostracism during the festival. Because if you do not say so, that the Baraisa is referring to deliberation, then in cases of capital law that are taught here too, would we put someone to death on the festival? What's the problem if you hear a capital case and you're going to issue the verdict, and the verdict is execution, right? It's a death sentence. Would we do that during a festival? Well, why not? If so, the judges who issue such a verdict would be prevented from rejoicing in the festival, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Akiva says, from where is it derived with regard to the Sanhedrin, who put someone to death, that they may not taste any food or drink for the rest of the day? Isn't that interesting? If the Sanhedrin finds that someone is guilty in a capital case and they are going to be put to death, and by the way, there's no higher court of appeal, so when the Sanhedrin puts someone to death, they're executed that day. If a Sanhedrin, finds someone guilty and they are executed, the judges of that court have to fast for the rest of the day. Rabbi Akiva says, from where is it derived with regard to the Sanhedrin who put someone to death that they may not taste any food or drink for the rest of the day? The verse states, Leviticus 19:26, you shall not eat with the blood. Now, normally that means that a kosher animal is slaughtered. You drain all the blood out of the animal. And obviously we never drink blood. And that's what it means. That verse is just saying we don't eat blood. We don't eat meat with blood in it. But Rabbi Akiva is reading out from that verse, not only that, but if blood is on your hands and, the Sanhedrin who's going to vote to execute this, he's probably a murderer, then they should not eat that day either. So rather, the statement of the Baraisa that the court judges cases of capital law must be referring to deliberating in judgment and not actually reaching a verdict, in which case ostracism is not removed from their tool belt, as it were, because the verdict will only come after the festival anyway. At that time, if they need to ostracize the party who, isn't listening to their verdict, they can do so. So we have no proof that the laws of ostracism are overridden or not overridden by the commandment to rejoice in the festival. We don't have a proof yet. Rav Yosef said to Abaye, if so, if only deliberations are conducted during the festival, you have a perversion of justice because you are delaying the verdict. They heard the case, they deliberate the case, and now they're not going to issue the verdict, even though they know what the verdict will be. Rather, the judges come in the morning as usual, hear the case, deliberate in judgment, then they go home and eat and drink all day as much as they desire in order to fulfill the commandment to rejoice in the festival. Then they come back to the courthouse close to sunset and complete his judgment, i.e. they dispense the verdict. And if necessary, they kill, they execute the one who is guilty of a capital offense. And in this manner, they are not prevented from enjoying the festival properly. Therefore, the penalty of ostracism also has to be available to them, and therefore ostracism is not overridden by the commandment to rejoice in the festival. Abaye said, come in here a different proof from a baraisa. Right? Abaye is going to keep arguing with Rav Yosef about this. And it is the case with regard to one who is ostracized that the sages permitted him to get a haircut during chol hamoed. This indicates that one who is ostracized need not observe the practices of ostracism during the festival. And Rav has said it is taught in Baraisa that they permitted it, which would indicate that the sages permitted all those who were ostracized to cut their hair on chol hamoed. No, it says they permitted him. This indicates that it is referring to an individual case. Not that they permitted it, but they permitted him. So it's not generally permitted, it's permitted to this guy. Why? This indicates that it is referring to an individual case where one went and appeased his opposing litigant and the sages came and released him from the decree of ostracism. He submitted to their will. He did what they asked him to do. Therefore, now he's released from the decree of ostracism. I just have 3 short paragraphs to go, then I'm coming to questions and comments. The Gemara asks a similar question with regard to the Mitzvah, the one suffering from tzara'as. What is the law? May he observe the practices of his tzara'as status, or are they overridden by the commandment to rejoice during the festival? Abaye said, come in here a proof from a baraisa. And both the Nazir and the Mitzvah, who transfers from his state of Tuma to his new state of Tahara, from ritual impurity to ritual purity, and that happens chol hamoed, it happens during the intermediate days of the festival, they may shave on the intermediate days of the festival. This implies that if during the days of his impurity, he must observe all the ordinary practices, even during the festival. Right? If his days of impurity end on chol hamoed, then he can shave. But if he's still, in his days of impurity, then he has to observe the customs of then the obligations and restrictions of being a Nazir or being a Mitzvah. This festival does not override those. But the Gemara rejects this proof. The Baraisa is speaking, employing the didactic style of needless to say, meaning, needless to say, during the days of his impurity on the festival, he does not observe the practices of ostracism. However, with regard to one who regains his state of purity during chol hamoed, one might think that we should issue a decree that he should not be permitted to shave, lest he delay sacrificing his offerings until the last day of the festival, when it is prohibited to sacrifice offerings of an individual. And perhaps prohibiting from shaving will prevent this possibility. So I was having a little trouble understanding this. It seems like this person, like the Nazir, he had a vow not to benefit from the grapevine, nor to cut his hair. So his period of Naziris ends. At that time, he's obligated to bring certain offerings. But I think that if that day, when he's obligated to bring those offerings, lands on a festival itself, like the last day of Passover, the last day of Sukkot, then it's not permitted to bring individual offerings, and maybe he's excused from bringing those offerings. It could be expensive for him, so he could avoid that expense. So he regains his purity without having to bring those expensive offerings. And in order to arrange for things to come out that way, he might delay. And so to prevent him from doing that, because, for example, he can't shave and he can't bring those offerings until he shaves, they permitted him to shave on chol hamoed if his Nazirus ended on chol hamoed. Therefore, because one might have thought that shaving should be prohibited, the Baraisa teaches us that it is in fact permitted for him to shave during the intermediate days of the festival. And finally, Rava said, coming here from a different source, the verse states, and the Mitzorah, in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be torn. And the extra emphasis of the phrase, and the Mitzorah, comes to include the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, teaching that all the laws of the Mitzorah also apply to him. And the status of the high priest during the entire year is like that of everyone on a festival. As we learned in a Mishnah, the high priest sacrifices animals when he has the status of an acute mourner. Right? Normally, you can't, I don't think you can enter the temple if you're a mourner. You certainly can't bring offerings. But the Kohen Gadol can, because he has obligations to the nation. So even if he lost, his parent on that day, he can still bring offerings. However, the part that is apportioned to the priest, there's a part of certain offerings that the priests eat. The Kohen Gadol, who's in an acute state of mourning, his relative died that day, he does not eat the priestly portion. Learn from it that the Mitzorah practices the customs of his tzara'as during the festival, and the Gemara concludes, indeed, learn from it that this is so. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's see if there are any comments or questions. We did another whole daf, and not an easy daf. A lot of material we covered today. Sharon, I am teaching my students about the mitzvah of returning lost objects later this year. I included Rabbi Meir's prayer in the lesson. The reason for the required tzedakah is really interesting. And the story, by the way, of why Rabbi Meir is involved. Why are we bringing the merit of Rabbi Meir, the miracle worker, connecting that to finding lost objects? It's in that same article at Chabad, right? So Chabad, prayer for lost objects. In the footnote, you'll find the story of Rabbi Meir and a lost person. It's very interesting. Ifa, and thank you, Sharon. Ifa, could they not call the decorated Syrian cakes something different, making the kosher for Pesach recipe a clear part of it, then all might enjoy? Yeah, but the issue is not the name, right? The issue is this would be permitted on Passover. It's not chametz, it's not unkosher, it's fine. The problem is that these cakes, very often people will make a mistake when baking them, that they'll sort of, bake them for too long or knead the dough for too long. And then even though there's no yeast in it, it will still rise, and then it would become chametz and become prohibited. So the problem isn't the name, the problem is the practice that can lead to food that is not kosher for Passover. And so there was this one fellow who said, but I'm very careful and meticulous. When I bake those cakes, there's no chance that they're going to become chametz. There's no chance that the dough is going to rise. Nevertheless, the sages said to him, you can't do it because your cake's going to be permitted when everyone else's aren't. Now, maybe what you're saying, Eve, is, well, he should call it something different. And then, he's not making those decorated Syrian cakes. He's making this other thing, Baitos's cakes, right? Just name him after himself. But the fact is, if anyone watches what he's doing, he's making that same recipe. He's just being meticulous that there's no chance that the dough rises, and they don't allow that. Aoife also says, one may not have realized the baby's hair was bothering it so badly before the festival, even though it was already born. For kindness' sake, make it comfortable. Exactly, and that is the law. And finally, Guy Thomas Kennedy, how long is a fast if it doesn't begin until after a fulfilling festival? Does the fast end at nightfall or a full 24 hours? Wait, what are we talking about here? What fast are you talking about? Maybe you're talking about the Sanhedrin, right? And the case of that they have to fast. They can't eat after giving this guilty verdict. Right, exactly. So I think that is what you're talking about. And this idea, so what we said is they would hear the case in the morning, deliberate, then they would go and eat in order to rejoice in the festival. Then they come back, issue the verdict, if necessary, impose capital punishment. And then they can't eat the rest of the day. And what does that mean? Until the end of daylight, because then a new day begins, right? So they have to fast the rest of the day, but it's not a 24-hour fast for them. It's not like Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur. It's like a minor fast that only lasts until daylight ends. And so that's why they would have very little time when they're actually fasting, even during hamoed, which we want to avoid. Very good. And Sharon, finally, just added, didn't Aaron fulfill all the responsibilities of a Kohen Gadol on the same day that his sons died? Just so, exactly. And that's where we learn out that lesson, that the Kohen Gadol, because his obligations are to the whole nation, he has to put his own mourning aside. There's still going to be some differentiation. That's why he can't eat the priestly portion on that day. But even in the midst of his mourning, he has to serve because the nation needs its high priest. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, for page 15. Have a terrific night.